In this lesson, we will discuss the use of reflexive verbs in Italian. You already know and use one reflexive verb without thinking about it, the verb chiamarsi. When you state your name, mi chiamo Raven, or ask someone their name, come ti chiami, you are using the reflexive verb chiamarsi. Remember that the verb chiamarsi literally translates as to call oneself. In the cartoon, the woman asks, come ti chiami? What is your name? Or literally, what do you call yourself? Notice that the verb chiamarsi is conjugated in the tu form, chiammi, and the pronoun ti also corresponds to tu. The verb and the pronoun reflect each other and that they both correspond to the same person. In other words, the subject and the object are the same. The subject, you, tu, is also the object, yourself, ti chiami. This is also true for the other examples in the cartoon. Mi chiamo Angela. I call myself Angela. The reflexive pronoun mi corresponds to io, as well as the verb chiamo, I call. And then we have come si chiama. The woman asks what the man calls himself or what the man's name is. Si is the reflexive pronoun for lui, lei, and chiama is the verb chiamare in the lui, lei form. In the final cartoon, come vi chiamate? What do you call yourselves or what are your names? Vi corresponds to voi as does chiamate. And then finally, ci chiamiamo Angela. Ci, the noi reflexive pronoun, and chiamiamo, the noi form of the verb chiamare. Our name is Angela, or we call ourselves Angela. Reflexive verbs are called reflexive verbs because of this reflective property in that the subject and the verb are the same. The reflexive pronoun is the same, corresponds to the same person as the verb. Remember that in previous lessons, you learned how to use other types of pronouns, direct object pronouns. Verbs that are generally reflexive can also function as non-reflexive verbs when they are used with direct or indirect object pronouns instead of reflexive pronouns. In these cases, the action of the verb is applied to someone or something else. For example, instead of calling oneself, you could also call someone else. At this point, the subject and object no longer reflect each other. They are no longer the same. Let's look at some examples. Mi chiamo Lucia. In this example, we have the reflexive pronoun mi that reflects chiamo. Mi is the io reflexive pronoun, and chiamo is the io form of the verb chiamare. And then we have mio fratello si chiama Davide. Lui, lei reflexive pronoun, lui, lei form of chiamare. And here we have lo chiamo ogni domenica. I call him every Sunday. Here we have the verb chiamare in the io form, but we have the direct object pronoun lui that corresponds to him. So in this case, the pronoun and the verb do not reflect each other. They are not the same. Another example of a non-reflexive verb, the verb chiamarsi used non-reflexively. Se non lo chiamo io, lui mi chiama. If I don't call him, he calls me. Here we have chiama in the lui lei form and then me referring to io. In this case, the verb and pronoun do not reflect. Now let's take a look at a list of common reflexive verbs. Notice that the infinitive form contains the pronoun si and the final e of the non-reflexive form of the verb has dropped. For example, in chiamarsi, the final e has dropped from chiamare, creating chiamar, and then the reflexive pronoun si has been added to create chiamarsi. Let's look at alzarsi. The non-reflexive infinitive would be alzare. The e has dropped, leaving alzar, and then we add the reflexive pronoun alzarsi. So we have chiamarsi, alzarsi, vestirsi, mettersi, annoiarsi, fermarsi, addormentarsi, innamorarsi, scusarsi, svegliarsi, lavarsi, prepararsi, divertirsi, sentirsi, riposarsi, arrabbiarsi, sposarsi, and laurearsi. Now let's take a look at how reflexive verbs are used in the infinitive. For example, when a reflexive infinitive verb follows a conjugated verb. Usually, when you have two verbs back to back in Italian, the second verb stays in the infinitive. This is also true of reflexive verbs, but while the verb itself remains in the infinitive, the attached reflexive pronoun changes. For example, io non voglio alzarmi oggi. I do not want to get up today. Notice that alzarsi is our infinitive verb, and it has changed to alzarmi because it's referring to io. Mia mamma dice devi prepararti. Again, the infinitive of the reflexive verb is prepararsi, but because it's referring to you, tu, the infinitive prepararsi becomes prepararti. So while the verb itself does not change, the reflexive pronoun does change. I hope this presentation will help you to understand reflexive verbs in Italian. Ciao!